my pleasure today to be here with all of you and to have joining us Dr. Bill Richards, who for many, I'm sure he needs no introduction, but really is one of the luminaries of this space and someone who has been holding this work since he started doing it back in the 60s, well, before we had a period of where psychedelic research and psychedelic clinical work was became dormant. And so before I introduce him, I just have a few slides that many here will be familiar with, but for those of you who are new to Mind Medicine Australia, just an opportunity to give a brief introduction to our work, and then I'll introduce Bill. But before I get into the slides, I might just invite everybody just to take a moment to settle and to land in this space together. So inviting anybody to close down their eyes if you feel comfortable. If you prefer, just to soften your gaze for a moment. And just as we sit together to come together in this space, we'd ask everyone just to take a deep breath in and let that breath out. And just bringing your awareness into your body and into the connection that you feel with the floor, perhaps under your feet, the chair, perhaps underneath your backside, and just connecting with that feel of solidity as you connect with the land. And as we do so, acknowledging the lands that we're on. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and just feeling that, acknowledging the land itself, as well as the custodians of the land that you're on, acknowledging their connection to lands, waters, and community, and acknowledging the elders, past, present, and emerging. And then just taking one last deep breath in together, and then letting that out. And then when you're ready, opening your eyes back up, and coming back into the space as we move into today's session, which is titled The Awakening Dialogue Between Psychedelic Research and Religious Scholarship with Bill Richards, as I've mentioned. So before we get into our content, just to start with a disclaimer, our focus at Mind Medicine Australia is on the development and use of evidence-based psychedelic-assisted therapies for their use within regulated healthcare systems. We don't encourage the use of psychedelic medicines outside of this context, and we don't support the use of these substances in any way that's unlawful. Our presentations are intended for educational purposes only, and they don't constitute medical advice. Please do discuss your individual health needs with your healthcare provider. And as a final note, these sessions are recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel. So to set a little bit of context, it's no surprise to anybody that we really do have what many would describe, I think accurately, as a mental health epidemic in Australia, as well as in many other countries around the world. It's as many as 1 in 4 Australians that'll have a mental illness in any given year. 1 in 6, research has shown, are on antidepressants. This includes up to 1 in 30 children, 1 in 4 older people. Mental illness is a huge issue. There are huge costs to this, and there are costs, financial costs to individuals as well as our economy, but those financial costs are nowhere near as significant as the costs to people's lives, to their quality of life, and to their relationships and families. I feel everyone would agree with that. And the responses that we've seen from government and peak bodies has often been slow, incremental. There might be reports and investigations, but not significant change. It's sort of sometimes more of the same approach. And so the elephant in the room, as we often say, is the lack of innovation. As mentioned, often the strategy is to have another report put together by government perhaps and to investigate. But rather than looking at a big change in how we approach mental illness, it's often then looking at perhaps more funding for similar programs that aren't getting the results that people are looking for. And this slide shows a few statistics here that speak to this. So studies have shown only 15% of sufferers with depression experiencing remission from some pharmacotherapies, 60 to 60% showing some response but still experiencing symptoms, and often 50 to 80% relapsing after treatment stops. And as many know, there's side effects to a lot of SSRIs and antidepressants. PTSD, similarly, there's a lot of research shows that many people don't go into remission from the treatments that we have. And so, as I mentioned earlier, more of the same approach may not solve the problem. And so this is the issue that Mind Medicine Australia is here to tackle. We exist to help alleviate the suffering and suicides caused by mental illness in Australia through expanding the treatment options available to medical practitioners and their patients. And our focus of this is in the clinical use of psychedelic assisted therapies. We are a charity, not for profit, and we look at the implementation of psychedelic assisted therapies from a whole system approach, trying to look broadly at the ecosystem to say, how can we support this? Our primary focus at this stage is on psilocybin and MDMA as the first two medicines, also secondarily with ketamine. And the reason those medicines are the ones that we're focused on is because they're MDMA and psilocybin are the ones where the research and regulatory approval is further developed. Ketamine as well as the one psychedelic agent that has had regulatory approval for a number of years due to its registration as an anesthetic. Our indications of success are if we can see these therapies become an integral part of our mental health system, achieving high remission rates, leading to a substantial improvement in the mental health statistics I mentioned earlier, and very importantly, that they become accessible and affordable to all Australians who need them, regardless of whereabouts in Australia, really importantly trying to support regions and regardless of income, so really trying to make sure that these treatments are affordable. As I mentioned, the first two medicines that are the primary focus are psilocybin and MDMA. At this stage, psilocybin has been used largely for depression, but also is showing promise for OCD addiction as well as other indications, and MDMA for PTSD. But again, there's also research showing positive outcomes with MDMA for other conditions, including addiction, but also depression and others. These protocols are generally 2 to 3 sessions of dosing and then having preparation psychotherapy sessions before and then integration sessions afterwards. And the goals of therapy is to go into remission of mental illness, to restore a higher quality of life without needing further medicine treatment. So it's not an ongoing therapy, it's a course of therapy that then is gone through and then completed. Safety profile of these treatments is really great in medically controlled environments. And then a number of years ago, both of these were granted breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA in the US. And this was something that was aimed to try to fast track the approval process. On this slide here, this is sharing the 4 strategic pillars that Mind Medicine Australia has. So these include awareness and knowledge building as one, our professional development program as a second, we support research as a third, and then patient access as a fourth. So these are the 4 fields that basically everything that we do fits into one or more of these 4 pillars. And just to give a brief overview, I just want to share a little bit about what we've managed to achieve across these 4 areas. So starting with patient access, and this is perhaps the most significant achievement of Mind Medicine Australia, was the rescheduling of MDMA and psilocybin that came off the back of our advocacy efforts and came into effect last year. And this made Australia the first country in the world to move these into the controlled medicine scheduling. In addition to that, we've secured access pathway for MDMA and psilocybin for psychiatrists who are looking to use it. The aim of this is to make sure access is equitable and affordable with high quality medicines at an affordable cost. And then we also have a patient support fund, the aim of which is 100% of funds in this fund go on to subsidizing treatment as a way to help tackle the affordability challenge that I mentioned earlier. Moving on to awareness and knowledge building. We ran an international summit back in 2021, and that was the largest of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere at the time. We run sessions such as this, as well as other online media and presentations, and a number of different formats where we're raising awareness with various stakeholders. And then we also did, for a number of years, run a network of chapters, which were local community involvement groups, supporting our advocacy efforts. Our professional development program currently is one of the main programs of our organization. Our certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies, which I'll share a little bit more about in a moment, has to date trained almost 500 clinicians. And this is a 4-month training that allows healthcare professionals to upskill to be ready to start working in this space. And we do have a second introductory program called the Fundamentals of Psychedelic Assisted Therapies, which is available for not only healthcare professionals, but also members of the general public who are wishing to learn more about these new treatments. And then finally, in research, there was a $15 million grant from the Commonwealth, the Australian Commonwealth Government, that was secured after advocacy efforts that Mind Medicine Australia made in Canberra, which was at the time and potentially still is the largest government fund towards psychedelic assisted medicines. And that was distributed between, I think it was 7 different trials around Australia. And then we're also the largest funder of research in this area outside of government and pharmaceuticals. And there's a number of trials that we've funded from the organisation. And this includes a registry, a research registry that's collecting outcome data from treatments that are happening in clinical settings. So speaking of these treatments in clinical settings, this is just a quick overview of some of the headlines that we saw when psilocybin and MDMA became rescheduled in Australia. And this really did highlight that this was a first and it hadn't been seen in any other countries before. And while this is an amazing opportunity, as you'll see at the bottom, there is an obligation that comes with this on us as a country and as a community to make sure that we get this right and that we do this well and roll these therapies out safely because people in other countries are watching what happens here. And we're very pleased to be seeing that the development of this space is happening in a way that is very sensible, very thought out and progressing not too quickly, but also in a way that's not too onerous and slow. And so just moving on to a couple of points about our programs and ways that you can potentially get involved or continue to upskill. As I mentioned, our certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies is a training program. It runs over 4 months. It is online for the most part with a 6-day in-person at the end, and it is open to a wide variety of healthcare professionals who may be relevant to working in this space. And this is a main program that we run and something that I think us as a team are really proud with to see something that's really a leading course in this space. A central part of it is our faculty. This list here is a sample of the members of the faculty, but it is not exhaustive. There are some other amazing teachers from Australia and internationally who are part of it. And you will see that Bill, who's joining us tonight, does teach as a part of the program. And we're extremely lucky to really be working with leaders from around the world in this field who are sharing their knowledge in this space. And then finally, we have the next intake of this program is in July. And so if anyone here is interested, please do go to cpat.mindmedicineaustralia.org. You can learn more about the course there. You can also book a call with a member of our team and download some additional information. So for anyone who's thinking about feeling that call to work in this space, please do take a look at the course and then reach out and we can give you any more information to see if this training program is right for you. As I mentioned earlier, for those who are interested in learning more but aren't quite ready to take the plunge of doing a full professional development training, our Fundamentals of Psychedelic Assisted Therapy is a shorter online 6-week course. It has a smaller but also amazing faculty of teachers from Australia and internationally, and this covers at a much higher level and introductory level the key areas for those who are wanting to learn more about this space. You can go to mindmedicineaustralia.org.au/fundamentals. If you are interested in getting involved, there's a number of ways you can do so here. Obviously, getting trained and upskilling for anyone who's a clinician. If you are of means, donating or helping to fundraise is something that would be amazing and really needed and really appreciated. Please do follow us on social media. You can sign up for our newsletters on our website as well. If you're interested in volunteering, you'll find information on our website how to apply for that as well. But also importantly, just starting conversations and continuing to have dialogue with people in your community, because as we come out of a period of prohibition where there's a lot of stigma about these, the more people learn, the more opportunity there is for change to happen. And that includes speaking with members of your community, as well as with other healthcare professionals, whether they're colleagues or your own practitioners that you see for your own healthcare. And then just as couple final things to finish up. If you are able at all to provide any support or funding, we really do appreciate any donations you can provide. We do have 2 options for donations. The first is to our Patient Support Fund. 100% of funds in this go straight to subsidizing treatment costs for those who otherwise could not afford it. And it is really important that this is not just a treatment for those who are wealthy. And so if you're able to make a contribution to this, we'd be extremely grateful. And then if you'd like to make a general donation, please, we would be very open to receiving that as well. And this will help to support us in a number of our different programs. So this may include funding research or helping to provide equitable access to our training program with subsidies for those who come from regional areas or Indigenous peoples or other areas, as well as supporting some of our other programs. And so this is our last slide, my last slide before I pass over to Bill. This just has a list of some of the upcoming webinars we have. We do have a webinar like this each month. Next month, you'll be joining a number of leaders of our training program. So anyone who is interested in training, please do sign up for this one with Lauren McDonald, David Arizzo, and Ellie Kotler. So three of the key faculty members. I'll be joining on that one as well to speak about the training and opportunities to enter this space and work in it. But you'll also see a number of other great sessions coming up over the coming months. So please do have a look through these, see which ones speak to you, and then sign up and join us for those. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. I've spoken for more than long enough because no one's here to listen to me, and to say a huge thank you, Bill, for joining us. Just as a very brief word of introduction, Bill, as I mentioned to begin with, he's been one of the luminaries in this space. It was in the 60s that he started working with psychedelics when he was a young psychologist in Germany. And then he worked in research through into the 70s when it started to close down. And then when research started to open up, he was not only was he one of the last to stop working with psychedelic assisted therapies when it stopped, he was one of the very first, as he established the program at Johns Hopkins University with Roland Griffiths and Mary Cosimano. And then he's been leading the field ever since. And so thank you so much, Bill. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us here today.
Well, it's an honor to be with you. Well, greetings, everyone. You really are in the future. It's still Tuesday evening in Eastern US here. And you're also in the future in terms of really integrating psychedelics into medical care. And thank you for your vision as a country. I know there's a lot to be done yet, but you, along with maybe Canada and Switzerland, are leading the way. And I think you're an inspiration to the rest of the world. Okay, applications of psychedelics here. Usually I wear my clinical psychologist hat and I talk about research. And today you're giving me the luxury of wearing my religion scholarship hat, which I intend to fully enjoy, and I will speak in that dialect. But let's just acknowledge that there are many applications of psychedelics, certainly in medicine, in education, experiential learning, and that's a topic for another day, and in religion. For those of you who are involved in any sort of institutional religion, let me just comment that religion, religare, is what binds us together. And no matter what tradition we're in, whether Christian or Islamic or Hindu or you name it, we have our sacred scriptures, we have our theological formulations, we have our rituals and ceremonies, we have our social activism. And then there's this fifth pillar of primary religious experience, or what you could call revelation in the present, in the human minds of people living now with beating hearts. And we could perhaps create a personality test for different emphases in these 5 areas. I would suggest they're all important, but clearly today we're going to focus on the fifth, on primary religious experience. Secondary is what you've learned, you've read about, experiences that have happened to other people. Primary is what happens to us. Let's also acknowledge that there are many ways of accessing these alternative states of consciousness, many forms of meditation, sensory isolation, overload, natural childbirth, etc., etc. Sometimes they happen to people completely in the blue, unexpected, for unknown reasons. But then we know they can be facilitated by psychedelic substances. And the value of psychedelics, I would suggest, lies in their potency, their reliability, and for most people, their safety when they are skillfully administered. These are non-addictive substances, essentially non-toxic. We could view them as sacred molecules that provide opportunities to access healing processes and to discover new knowledge, as opposed to viewing them simply as drugs that have drug effects. I would suggest they open a door, they provide an opportunity. Then what we do with that opportunity depends on our motivation, our unique life situation, our capacity to choose to unconditionally trust and relinquish control. As you may know, in the ayahuasca traditions in South America, they talk about the psychedelic agent as the teacher, that when you take the drug, you go into your mind to receive a lesson. And sometimes it's a painful one or a difficult one. Sometimes it's a beautiful, inspiring one. But the lesson is always facilitating your personal and spiritual development. Clearly, this is not new. Psychedelics apparently have been around for around at least 9,000 years. They emerge in cultures and they get suppressed, and they emerge and they get suppressed. And right now they are emerging in our culture. And hopefully we're wise enough to safely and meaningfully integrate them into our societies. Medicine and religion in our recent history have been polarized, but there are many cultures in which they have been integrally interrelated. They're both part of healing. Now, when we start talking about it, we have to be very careful because words have different meanings for different people. Some people like the word God. Some people are turned off by the word God, okay? Choose your word for these deep mysteries within us. Edmund Sinnott at Yale, biologist, used to talk about the purpose of properties of protoplasm. That's supposed to make scientists happy. Or Buddhists may talk about the void that contains all reality. Philosophers talk about the nameless or the one. Star Wars aficionados may talk about the Force. May the Force be with you. Well, whatever words we put on it, we are reliably discovering incredible mysteries deep within our minds. Now, one of the most important points as we approach this from a religion scholarship lens is that for many years, religious scholars have differentiated between so-called Western mysticism and Eastern mysticism. Western mysticism was relation to the personal Christ or Jesus often. Eastern mysticism was the more abstract unitive consciousness. We now know through psychedelic research that it appears that most people can experience both of those things, that it doesn't really matter whether you're born in the East or the West, that the unitive consciousness that Shankara called the Atman Brahman unity, or moksha or samadhi, and perhaps what the Protestant theologian Paul Tillich called the ground of being. This unitive state is a repertoire, part of our human repertoire. It's within us. But also, both in religions like Hinduism, where they talk about the relationship to the Ishvara, the personal manifestation of the divine, as in Lord Shiva, for example. And in traditional Christianity, the relation to the Christ archetype or the personal Jesus. They're both there. And different languages, different historical symbols, but perhaps they're both within each of us. Here's Shankar and Ramanuja. Ramanuja stressed the Ishvara, the personal deity. Paul Tillich, the ground of being. Abraham Maslow, who I had the good fortune to study with for a year, back in 1966, wrote this book, This Psychology of Science. And Maslow was a natural Jewish mystic. He never took psychedelics. He had a very acute heart condition, and it didn't seem like a good idea. Actually, he died jogging at 62. But he was very interested in other states of consciousness, and he wrote and thought out of his own spontaneous transcendental experiences. And the way he saw it was that there was nothing unscientific about these profound experiences. Rather, we should see them, he said, as the frontiers of science, where we are developing new language and new concepts. And of course, he coined terms like self-actualization and peak experiences and pointed to the farther reaches of human nature. Before that book, he had published Toward the Psychology of Being and Religion's Values and Peak Experiences, just brief lectures, but if you don't know them, I would recommend them. And then we have my friend Walter Pahnke, who did the first scholarly investigation with psilocybin in terms of facilitating so-called religious experiences, where on Good Friday in Boston University's Marsh Chapel, in a basement chapel, he gave 20 theological students either psilocybin in 30 milligrams, I think it was, or nicotinic acid, which created kind of a burning sensation and then vanished. But it was the first double-blind experiment that clearly illustrated that the psychedelics really do catalyze incredibly profound experiences, that there's more than suggestion and wish fulfillment going on here. And one of the guides in Walter's research project was Houston Smith, who many of you may know as an esteemed scholar of comparative religion. And he wrote freely of his relatively few but incredibly profound psychedelic experiences. And Houston had deep friendships with people from all different world religions. And in his book, The World's Religions, that you may already have, he writes from within each of the great religious traditions. Now, fast forwarding to the present, Tony Bossis at NYU, New York University, and I did a study with professional religious leaders where we gave them two sessions with 25 milligrams of psilocybin. and that's finally approaching publication. That's a long story I won't bore you with. But many of the participants in that study have written their own articles and books. And some have, two of them, one of them, Hunt Priest here, and the other, Zachary Kamenetz, Jewish rabbi, they both have formed nonprofit organizations trying to build bridges of understanding with priests between Christianity and the psychedelic research frontier, and with Zach between Judaism and the psychedelic frontier. And other scholars are jumping into the fray here. I would call your attention to Jamie Clark Soules, a very highly respected professor at Perkins School of Theology, an expert in the Gospel of John, a biblical scholar in a Baptist seminary, who has been writing very articulate articles about the importance of psychedelics as a frontier in religious scholarship. You can Google her name if you like and find her articles. Going back in history a little bit, we have David Steindl-Rast, a Catholic monk, and I think he's about 97, 98 now, living in Switzerland, who has long talked about the importance of psychedelics. He has a website, gratefulness.org, that can inspire you if you need inspiration, as well as his friend Vanya Palmers, Zen Buddhist, also living in Switzerland, who has been very open about the value of his psychedelic experiences and their relevance for religious scholarship. And recently we have Richard Rohr, a highly respected Christian who has a daily message that goes out to countless people. And he is saying, let's take psychedelics seriously. Okay, I trust most of you know there is no such thing as the psychedelic experience. Psychedelics give access to a vast strata of different forms of experience within the human mind. There are those of potentially positive impact, personal psychodynamic experiences, visionary experiences, and what I'll soon define as mystical consciousness. But let's acknowledge there are potentially negative psychedelic experiences, mainly of panic, paranoia, and confusion. And frankly, they are extremely rare when people are well prepared. They kind of seem to be generated when people take a psychedelic and fight for control or take a bigger dose than they're ready to deal with. And then there are neutral psychedelic experiences, pretty colors and perceptual changes that may be intriguing, but they're really not life transformative in any serious way. Okay, here's Hermann Hesse's Green Door. If you've read Steppenwolf, you know that there's the green door in the garden wall that appears for us just when the time is right. And that's certainly what happens when you take a psychedelic. And it takes you into what he called the magic theater, as many doors into as many boxes as you please. And behind each door, exactly what you seek awaits you. We would say, perhaps exactly what you need awaits you. Let's acknowledge set and setting, the importance of trust, taking the leap of faith, the courage to explore, to suffer, to learn, to go beyond what the rational mind can easily understand. and setting the feelings of safety, confidentiality, and interpersonal caring that are critical in their importance. Here's our original lab at Johns Hopkins. You can see very much like a comfortable living room where we use nice cozy flannel sheets and eye shades and headphones, and people dive into their inner worlds. Let's acknowledge physiological factors, dosage, for example. For most people with psilocybin, you need at least 25 milligrams in order to access transcendental states, though there are many other variables that we need to consider. Now, let's go into the phenomenology of these alternative states. Some that open into bright and cheerful, beautiful places, some that lead us into very dark places. But they're both, I would suggest, incredibly important and valuable. It's not that one is good and one is bad. Um, Psycholytic therapy, that's usually low dose therapy with psilocybin, sometimes several sessions a week, even in Europe. That's where you are very likely to encounter guilt and grief and sadness and anger, to relive traumatic life experiences, explore interpersonal relationships, and so on. I like to reference St. John of the Cross, who wrote about the dark night of the soul as part of personal spiritual development. And in his framework, when you come to the dark night of the soul, you're really making progress. It's not that something's going wrong, okay? That most of us have personal developmental suffering that we need to move in and through. And that's an integral part of spiritual development. You may know Joseph Campbell, who has this wonderful theme that each of us are heroes on a journey. I don't know when you last thought of yourself as a hero, but try it on. It feels kind of good as we go through our different adventures in life. So this psycholytic, low-dose, psychedelic experience does often yield feelings of forgiveness, fresh insights, resolution of conflicts, new beginnings. In Christian Protestant circles, it's often called conversion experiences, being saved, starting life fresh, going through your guilt and your grief, and feeling cleansed in some way. But in our limited time today, I want to focus on transcendental states. This is what we didn't hear in graduate school, at least I didn't, the realm of visionary art, landscapes, visions, perinatal birth phenomena. During the action of psychedelics, people often see these incredible, beautiful geometric patterns. And they're multidimensional. There's the sense that you can move in and through them, almost if you were a atom moving through an electric wire, or flying through a ever expanding landscape of some kind. Incredibly beautiful. And then there may be iconography that opens up. This is Kuan Yin, Hindu gods. Precious stones often show up. Um, you may know Aldous Huxley's little essay, Why Are Precious Stones Precious? Why do we give them to one another at weddings and special occasions? And his hypothesis was because these precious gemstones are part of the language of our minds, we are born with them as archetypal forms deep within us. People do experience the Christ. This is just a very brief snippet from a woman's LSD experience. There was a magnificent vision of Christ, standing motionless in resplendent, radiant beauty, had form, but I could almost see through him. Immeasurable power, love, did not walk to him, but was there, space and time meaningless. I was bodiless, selfless, could grasp his feet and ankles. I embraced this formless form with an infinite love. Friendly power and love filled the light beyond words, unforgettable. Pretty remarkable to have a session like this, and they do happen in some devout Christians. The amazing thing is that they also happen in dedicated atheists who are almost embarrassed by them, but they happen. Very, very interesting. Now, mystical, unitive forms of consciousness. We have many terms for these. Maslow called them major peak experiences. Uh, Huxley, the source of the Platonic or perennial philosophy, so on. It's kind of amusing almost in the scientific literature. We're a little embarrassed by the uh, religious connotations of some of these experiences. So in the professional journals, we talk about non-dual experiences instead of unitive experiences, or mystical type experiences instead of mystical experiences. That's just our insecurity on the thresholds of science here. This unitive state is found in all the great world religions, as I think many of you know. In the monastic traditions in Christianity, it's called the beatific vision. In Islam, Baqwa wa Fana. In Judaism, Sekal Mufla. Taoism, Wu Wei. Hinduism is called moksha or samadhi. In Buddhism, nirvana, celestial Buddha fields, the pure land, satori. Walter Pahnke defined it as a state of consciousness with these 6 categories. And that is what we use in the research world to determine whether or not a mystical experience has occurred or how complete it may have been. Let me just quickly take you through these categories. The reason they're important, obviously, is because they are more than great surges of emotion, that they are also correlated with dramatic decreases in depression and anxiety. And they seem to have what William James called fruits for life. And they stay with you in memory. These are 3 of the early articles. There are many more since then that correlate the occurrence of these transcendental states of consciousness with rapid behavioral change. Okay, unity, internal or external, basically with closed eyes or open eyes. This is just one illustration. This was from a man being treated for alcoholism who had not gone to college, but I just enjoy his attempt to put it into words. He wrote, the most emotional experience I had during the day was the feeling I had died and was drifting into space, moving away from the earth. I started to become very uneasy and nervous, and then the clouds seemed to move aside for me to pass. I was terribly frightened. I felt so alone out there all by myself. Sometimes I seemed to be moving much faster. I wanted to go back, but I knew I could not. I began to drift more slowly now. From here, it is difficult to explain. There was nothing. It was like drifting into empty space. It was so beautifully bright you could see nothing. Then, far off, a small cloud or flower appeared. The beauty and colors were so intense it brought tears to my eyes, but I could not turn away from it. I stretched out my arms to encircle it, but it was growing like a beautiful flower. It became larger and larger till I could no longer control it, and then it burst into such magnificence and beauty as everything seemed to open up. I was laughing at the happiness it gave me. At that time, I thought I was God, but I couldn't be. This was God, and this must be heaven. I became very confused again. If God was here and I was here, I was God. God was me at that time. It seemed all men were here. We must truly all be one. I thought this is what has been said about eternal life. Um, Here's another quote you can read on your own. The second category is the sense of transcending time and space, discovering what religions call eternity, mathematics infinity. It's not time extended forever in the future, but it's the eternal present outside of time. Physicists are better at writing about this than we are. Then there's intuitive knowledge, what religious people call revelation. And we say, okay, what do you know? Um, this is taking intuition seriously. William James called it the noetic quality, the reality of God, the relativity of time, the indestructibility of consciousness, our spiritual interconnectedness, the absoluteness of beauty, the primacy of love, the wisdom and wise unfolding of the psyche, and the intensity of intuitive validation. Jeremy Narby is fond of saying, when you have a mystical experience or a mystical experience has you, once you've seen, you cannot unsee. That this state of consciousness feels more fundamental, more real than the state of consciousness most of us are in right now. Sacredness, often reflected in imagery of Gothic architecture or great domes, as the synagogue in Hungary, this entrance to the Blue Mosque in Isfahan. There's no question in my mind that that architect either took psilocybin or was a natural mystic. That's the imagery that people often see. Rose windows, mandalas. This is of Shiva, the dome in Isfahan, the dome of St. Peter's in Rome. But there's an intrinsic feeling there's something special, something sacred here. And you may know the theory that the Gothic cathedral may well have been the attempt to build the visionary world in this reality of time and space. Deeply felt positive mood, love, joy, peace, playfulness, unconditional acceptance, and then ineffability. These experiences just don't seem to want to be condensed into words. And I illustrate that with my friend Gorg here, the caveman who's transported to Manhattan, where he sees skyscrapers and cell phones and subways, and then he's zapped back to his cave, and his wife says, "What did you experience?" And all he can say is, "It was big, it was awesome, it was impressive." But he doesn't have the vocabulary yet for skyscraper and subway, okay? And that's the feeling people often have after these transcendental experiences, that the experience had a beautiful sense of order, meaning, symmetry, but they just don't have words to express it. Language has to develop in order for that to be possible. The Tao Te Ching says, "Those who speak do not know, those who know do not speak." And part of the difficulty in expression is also the paradoxicality. This is Escher's Angels and Demons I've always loved, or the Taoistic symbol. It's always both and instead of either or. I died, but I was never so alive. Sounds like nonsense, and yet it's felt to be profound revelatory truth. So here's what we mean by mystical consciousness. All these 6 categories, complete, intense. I would call your attention to my old friend Wayne Teasdale. If you want a good book on meditation by someone who understood psychedelics, his Mystic Heart is it. Teilhard de Chardin, a paleontologist who reminds us that we are spiritual beings having human experiences. And he's a wonderful example of one who wrote books both as a scientist and as a mystic. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, clearly has profound insights to share in works like The Universe in a Single Atom. That's what quantum physicists are talking about these days. In Judaism, we have Reb Zalman. In Islam, Al-Ghazali, and so on. Many people we could reference. I like to quote Tom Roberts, who wrote, "To most people who are even moderately experienced with psychedelics, concepts such as awe, sacredness, eternity, grace, agape, transcendence, transfiguration, dark night of the soul, born again, heaven and hell, are more than theological ideas. They are experiences." As we wind up here, I want to leave with you the ox herding series, which many of you may know from Zen Buddhism. It's a metaphor for the spiritual quest. It begins by searching for the ox, finding the first footprints, sighting it, approaching it, dialoguing, struggling, taming it, finally riding on the ox, and you may even become the ox. And then there may be a unitive awareness of no ox and no you. But Zen would stress that the culmination of the spiritual quest is riding the ox back home to the village to chop wood and carry water, to be an apprentice bodhisattva. That doesn't mean you can't have an occasional retreat back to the mountaintop, but the idea that the spiritual life primarily takes place in the village. Now, what's happening as we integrate them once again into religion? There are more and more ayahuasca churches, sometimes right around the corner from where you live, that are approved out of freedom of religion. The Native Americans are using peyote as they have for generations, as their sacrament, which is really taking mescaline, a powerful psychedelic. I would like to see them used legally in the training of clergy. Why not a weekend seminar with academic credit, especially for pastoral counselors, chaplains, hospice personnel? And might we live to see retreat centers where you could go and receive medical screening, competent preparation, skillful guidance, and initial integration with a psychedelic. Safe, legal, why not? There are risks with psychedelics, as there are with most things. I always refer to going skiing. If you jump on a pair of skis without any instruction, that's a pretty stupid thing to do. And if you throw a psychedelic in your mouth to just see what will happen, that's a pretty stupid thing to do. There is psychoeducation, learning how to navigate safely in internal worlds. And that material is easily accessible. So anyone interested in taking a psychedelic needs to really prepare and know what they're doing and do it wisely. Okay, a few insight suggestions here. This is from an appendix in my book, which if you don't have it, I invite you to study. It says much more than I can in this brief half hour. It's also out there in audiobook and paperback. Um, it's been translated now into 10 languages and is making its way in the world. But here, take this for what it's worth. And the closing of the book, I say, in case you had any doubts, God, or whatever your favorite noun for ultimate reality may be, is. God awaits and embraces us both as ground of being, call it celestial Buddha fields, the pure land, the void that contains all reality, the ground luminosity of pure awareness, and as spiritual personal deity, Lord Jehovah, Lord Jesus, Lord Krishna, Lord Buddha. There are heavens and hells within each of us, and they are magnificently designed. The ultimate nature of matter and mind, if you take the mystic seriously, appears to be an ontological source or force of energy called love. Consciousness, whether we like it or not, appears to be indestructible, which of course is one reason these drugs are so effective with terminal cancer patients. It enables them to lose the fear of death and live much more fully in the present. We really are more than we know of ourselves. We can experience content that does not arise from our personal developmental histories. How to understand that? Is it encoded in our DNA? Is it spiritually accessed, whatever that means? God moves in mysterious ways. When we trust and act in the world, a meaningful process unfolds. Each of us is still being created and crafted as a work of art. Classic mystical insight. There's truth in myth. The myth is not something that's not true, it's symbolic truth. Humility is awe before the unspeakable greatness of being. Beauty in and through the mind of the beholder can be absolute and incredibly magnificent. This is one of the most profound insights. We are all interconnected, and perhaps not only with one another, but with all that is. The unity of humankind, Gaia, the net of Indra, are very real. And of course, this has profound implications for world peace. The yearnings to know and understand truth, expressed in science and philosophy, are themselves encompassed within the temporal rivers that flow into the eternal ocean. Science is part of reality. And even there's something sacred about science. And finally, what is indeed is, stretching beyond our most favorite words and concepts. And with that, we've got some time for a few minutes anyway for discussion.
Thank you so much, Bill. As you mentioned, there's a few minutes for discussion. So if people would like to start putting some questions in the chat, but before we put any of those up, I'd also like to welcome our Executive Director, Tanya de Jong, onto the call to say hi to everyone.
Hi, hi, Bill. That was
Hi there, Tanya.
transcendental, I've got to say. And thank you for helping to raise our consciousness once again. We feel so privileged to have you on our advisory panel and the faculty of our CPAT course. And it's just always inspirational, your sessions. I learn something new, well, many new things every time I listen and listen to you and watch you. And yes, it was beautiful. By the way, who said that comment about we are really more than we know of ourselves? Each of us is being crafted and created as a work of art. Who said that? It's a beautiful.
Let's see, that we are more than we know of ourselves.
You don't have to tell me now. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm. It's late in the evening here.
No. Well, of course it is.
I can't quite, but they're classic mystical insights. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely beautiful. Well, anyway, I just thank you everyone for joining the webinar, and we've got this wonderful series as well for the rest of the year, which will, Scott, have you shown the upcoming webinars? Yeah. And it's so exciting too, because as many of you would know, Scott, I think, have you mentioned how many patients have already been treated in Australia?
No, we haven't been.
Oh, okay. So I just want to mention that I think getting on towards 100 patients have now been treated in Australia in clinical environments with psychedelic assisted therapies. And we're hearing from the psychiatrists that for many of the patients, it's like a year of therapy occurs in one day. And, so this is real world evidence that we're gathering through the clinicians in Australia. And many of you I know are involved in that work. I don't know if Scott's also mentioned, but we've also launched last week our directory of CPAT graduates. And so for those of you who are CPAT graduates, you can find yourself on there and flesh out your profile. And for those of you who are not and who are looking for qualified therapists in this field, we really encourage you to look at that directory. And I'll ask Anthony if you could please put the link to the directory into the chat. That'd be wonderful. And
Yeah,
Scott,
sure.
thanks, Anthony. Did you talk about the patient support fund a bit too, and how many patients we've supported already through that?
We didn't share numbers.
Okay, so I think through our patient support fund, we've already contributed getting towards $100,000 to about 10 or more patients around Australia. They're patients who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford the full upfront cost of the treatments. And we're contributing up to 50% of the costs of those treatments to patients. And I mean, if people need support like that, they need to provide reasons why. But we really want to make sure that these treatments can be accessible and affordable to those who need them the most. So with all of my heart, I just want to encourage all of you to donate to our Patient Support Fund. And I'll ask Scott if he can put a link in the chat or Anthony, a link in the chat for that now. And you can see some of the case studies of people who've actually received support through that. So 100% of all funds donated into that Patient Support Fund go towards supporting patients. And look, Bill, we'd love to get you to Australia. We just had Bessel here. Well, Bessel's in Australia at the moment, and we've just spent a couple of weeks with him and Leisha Sky. And, you know, we'd love you to come over. Gabor was just here. So all your contemporaries have been here in the last few weeks.
It's not impossible. We'll see.
Okay,
But
well, we'd
this
love to
is
talk
certainly,
about that.
it's amazing how well Zoom works, you know?
I know, but there's nothing like being in the flesh.
I agree. I agree. No, what you're doing is really inspiring to me. So
Thank you.
carry on. And all of you who will contribute in one way or another to the psychedelic frontier, thank you for your interest, your courage, your willingness to explore what may be an incredible healing force in the world.
No, absolutely. And, you know, the course that you and the other faculty are presenting, we're just getting such extraordinary feedback. I know there's quite a lot of CPAC graduates on the call. Hands up if you're a CPAC graduate and if you love the course. Yes, so there's quite a lot of CPAC graduates here, and we just put our hearts out to all of you to thank you for the incredible work you do in the world every day. And we hope that the course is helping you with your practice and your lives. And thank you. And please spread the word. We're at the moment filling the next intake of CPAT, and we're getting a lot of interest. So we encourage you each to tell at least 4 or 5 people to apply for CPAT in this next round. Don't we, Scotty?
Absolutely.
Scott's our course manager. So. Scott, you've
Perhaps
got lots of questions there.
Yeah, we've got some questions here, and we're about to run out of time. So perhaps I might grab a few and pass them to you, Bill, and we can just do a quick round of a couple of questions before we
Sure,
finish
we
up.
can go, if you can go over a bit, I can.
Okay, great. Well, that's nice. So then it looks like we have a little bit of extra time. So perhaps I'll go with this first one here. Bill, how do you feel a country like Australia is placed to embrace this kind of renaissance of understanding spirituality and evolution?
I don't quite know how to answer that. I just observe that you're leading the way, and the unthinkable is happening in Australia in a very positive way. And let's just keep it grounded and responsible. And you have the opposite problem we have. We have some well-trained people who can't work with the drugs legally. You have people who can potentially work with the drug, but they don't know how to do it yet. So we need to provide rapid training, but it's wonderful that it's becoming more and more legally accessible in Australia. And hopefully that will expand to other patient categories in time, notably work with in palliative care.
Great, thanks so much, Bill. And interestingly, around palliative care, there's been an application that was just been finished to try to increase the applications of psilocybin to allow access for those in palliative care. So this is something that hopefully over the next the rest of this year will be evaluated and maybe will become available soon. To move on to another question, are there any efforts being made to do clinical trials in nature rather than just indoors? Nature is the ultimate source of everything. Why not get our insights within nature itself?
I'm all for it. The problem is in doing research with FDA clearance and institutional review boards, they like people to stay lying on couches where everything is under control. And there's so many variables out in nature that it might be hard to get approval to do a project like that right now. But in the retreat centers of the future, I'm all for having some of them in scenic areas where perhaps during the height of a session, when you're beyond the ego, um, you just want the body to be safe, to just recline and not have to worry about tripping over a tree root or something, you know. But at the in the latter hours of a session, it would be wonderful to be able to walk in nature and hug a tree and meditate on a flower. Why not? You know?
Beautiful, thank you. Another one, how did the Christian faith and traditions get separated from what seems to be its essential psychedelic roots?
Ask Brian Murescu. uh, a long history. There's always the initial revelation that happens in a human mind somewhere, whether in India or medieval Europe or wherever. And then there are traditions. This is the way uh, our style of worship, and these are our favorite scriptures, and it gets codified, it gets limited, and then there's some kind of reformation, and there's a new burst of fresh religious experience. I think it's just the nature of the religious enterprise. Uh, Religions are always in process, changing, reforming, developing, you know.
Wonderful, thank you. And I might just grab one last question before we then look to finish up. And Steve's put in here, how does one enjoy the journey and not get stuck in trying to understand what's really going on?
Well, I think it's called humility, that there are things the rational mind uses language. And when you start getting beyond language, uh, as the tradition is, the wise mystic stays silent, you know. But we do the best we can. We write poems. But I think, in all seriousness, beyond language, there are means of expression in art and music and dance, that we could respect much more than we ordinarily tend to. Reason has its limits, but let's push it as far as we can, okay?
Bill,
What?
I'm thinking of Archbishop Ramirez that you probably know of, who once said human beings are like ants in the Harvard Library. They don't know what a university is, they don't know what a library is, they don't know what books are, they don't even know what words are, and they're trying to figure it out. And that's where I get the sense of we should just enjoy the journey. It's great to learn and understand, but realize we're just figuring out little bits and pieces as we go along. And that's the result of my psychedelic experience with clear light back in the 70s, is we don't really understand it, but it's looking after itself. We can just enjoy the ride. What do you think about that?
Yes, I would endorse that. Um, there are themes in religion, of the brotherhood of humankind, of love, of honesty, of the value of every human being, etc., that are not rational. They come from revelation, you know, and the meaning of suffering. Um, Christianity, for example, has the joyous resurrection, but it also has the crucifixion, you know, and Good Friday and so on. It's all part of the journey somehow. And most of us can tune into our losses and our grief and our doubt and our struggles, as well as our vision and inspiration.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks so much, Bill. At that, I think let's look to call it a day. Anthony has just popped in the chat there links to both our CPAP program as well as to the Patient Support Fund. So if there is anyone interested in that training or interested in donating to support the fund, we would really be appreciative and pleased to see more there. And Bill, do you have any closing comments before we say goodbye for today?
Well, just to wish each of you well. Thanks for being in this program. See how your own lives unfold as you soak up the knowledge that we're discovering here.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill. And thank you all for joining us. We're back next month, and our topic for next month's webinar is looking at career opportunities in psychedelic-assisted therapies, and it's with our faculty members, some of our faculty leaders from CPAT. So please do join us for that session, particularly for those who are clinicians on the call. So thank you all, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again, Bill.